King Solomon is known to be the wisest and richest man who ever lived. It's quite a distinction. He built the most magnificent temple, the dwelling place for God. How curious. It's something that causes us to wonder how it was that he fell from this high position into the darkness that he went into in the latter part of his life. You know, God had spoken to him about not amassing unto himself women and horses. And he did exactly the opposite. It's hard to imagine the mentality of a person that between wives and concubines has over 900 women. This is not a healthy human being. I'd like to walk a little bit through this part of Solomon's life, and it's recorded in 1 Kings chapter 3. It's very curious. In verse 3 it says, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David. Well, if we stop there, we'd say, wow. I mean, once, you know, when someone says something like that about someone else, he loves the Lord, it's almost like there's nothing else that needs to be said. That says everything. If someone loves God, then they have to be okay. But the verse goes on to say, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. In other words, his heart was divided. He truly loved the Lord and walked in the ways of his father David, but he continued to sacrifice at the high places. That means he's sacrificing to demons, to idols. And this is the richest, wisest man that ever lived, that built the temple. How did this happen? How did he get to be where he was? I asked this question and I pondered it for a while, and an answer came to me that seemed to be right and from the Lord. So Solomon went, continuing on in the next verse, he went to Gibeon, it says, to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. Now, beloved, on Gibeon stood the tabernacle that Moses had in the desert. However, at that time, the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of the Lord, was in the tent of David, in David's tabernacle. Solomon went to sacrifice to the Lord in the place where the presence of the Lord was no longer. In this place, he has this encounter with God, where God asks him, what can I give you? And Solomon says, therefore give to your servant an understanding heart, or a heart of wisdom, to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? I think you should have said, Well, God's the only one who can judge the people. Look at what Solomon asked for. And the next verse says, this seemed good to the Lord. It pleased the Lord. It was good. So you'd wonder again, saying it was good was like saying he loved the Lord. But there's an important discussion between that which is good and that which is perfect. And if you will, when we go back to the garden, good and evil is on the wrong tree. This is not the tree of life. In essence, Solomon asks God to give him something so that he can judge God's people. It's essentially like what was put before Adam and Eve. It's amazing to think about it. They sought after the ability to judge between good and evil, and Solomon is actually asking God to give him that very same thing. And what I would suggest is that this is the point at which Solomon's life turned. He was looking for something from the Lord. Now we really grasp this when we go back to looking at David, Solomon's father, the one who had a heart for God. And you'd say, God didn't actually come to David and say, what would you want? But David told him. And we quoted it in a former message from Psalm 27. And he made it very clear. David said, there's only one thing I want. There's only one thing I'm asking for. I want to be with you. Beloved, this takes us back to the discussion of why God felt neglected. Because by and large, the world, even the church, the believing community, follows after Solomon and looks at the things that needs to be done and looks at our inability to do things and asks God for a gift. Well, it's surely not bad. And only in the comparative light of David's life, the one who has the very key to God's heart, do we truly understand what was happening here. That Solomon sought something instead of relationship with God. So his heart wasn't properly tuned. It was a little off mark. And when God gave him the measure of gift that he gave him, that little bit that was off. You know, it's like if you're shooting a rocket to the moon, and on the earth it's 1 degree off. You'll miss the moon by, God knows, 100,000 miles. When Solomon's heart was magnified by all that was given to him, he went very, very dark. Exactly how dark did he go? There's a hill to the east of the Temple Mount. I've stood there. It's, I don't know, maybe a kilometer or something away as the crow flies And from the Temple Mount, there's a valley, and then there's this hill. It's spoken of as the hill to the east of the temple. And on that hill, it says, there were altars built to the gods of Solomon's wives. One of them was the god Moloch. And Moloch was worshipped by the sacrifice of children. Can you imagine the picture of how deep a hole this man fell into? People came out of the temple that Solomon built, and they looked to the east, and there was a straight visual line, and they saw the smoke of the flesh of burning children. What a horror. I stood there on one occasion, and all I could think of was, God, I'm so sorry. I feel so bad that people are coming out of worshiping you and they're seeing this. And I can only imagine how you felt. So this little thing, as it appears, asking for something from God instead of seeking his presence, ended up in gross darkness. And I would suggest that we consider this, because in all of the time that I've known the Lord now and traveled, the orientation of most of what we've experienced is focused on getting something done, asking God to give us so that we can. Perhaps, I would say that of all of the things that we could talk about that need to be adjusted within the believing community worldwide, this is number one on the list. This takes us back to even the story of when the woman poured the precious ointment on Yeshua's feet. And everyone that was there had the same response. What you could have done for people, it was a waste. They didn't see God. They didn't see him as a person. And so it was with Solomon. May it be that this would not be like that with us. And if it has been, that we would not continue that way. That we would recognize the difference in all of Solomon's riches and all of Solomon's glory. He continued to worship that which passed away. And God created us for this one thing, just to be with him, and that was the heart of David. May the Lord have mercy and show us our hearts and our motives, whether we are of the line of Solomon or of the line of David. The one whose key Yeshua holds.